I'm recording this when I'm very tired because I just finished editing the video and there's two quick things I need to say. If you've watched some of my other content or my debates or my TikTok content, you'll know I like to be a bit of a smartass or crack jokes here or there. I haven't done that at all with this video. This is a very serious and different type of video because I thought it was important to have a good, well-researched timeline of the Bruce Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins and Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson defamation and criminal trials. When I went looking, I couldn't find any that were particularly comprehensive, and I thought it would be a very good thing to do. With that said, I am incredibly frustrated at myself over one thing. I do not, for the rest of this video, pronounce Bruce Lehrmann's name correctly once. This is the only time you will hear me pronounce it correctly, because I read everything. I read a ton of articles. I read the entire judgment. I read interview transcripts. I didn't once, though, for some reason, actually listen to audio until I was editing the video to put it in the video. So I have just pronounced his name wrong every time. I just learned what it was in my head when I was reading it, and it never got corrected. And I didn't realize until like 2 minutes into the video when I hear someone say it for the first time, and I realize, oh, I've said it wrong the whole time. But to get this video out in a timely manner, I just had to, let it go. It's stupid. I'm stupid for it. But I stand by all the information in the video. If I missed anything, please let me know. But without further ado, I hope you enjoy. On the 15th of April 2024, Bruce Lehrmann lost his defamation trial against journalist Lisa Wilkinson and Channel 10 over their publications of materials that at the time alleged Bruce Lehrmann engaged in sexual activity without consent. This was a story and trial that spanned 5 years, sparking major debates in this country about consent, the Me Too movement, and the government's handling of the situation. I personally wasn't able to find a comprehensive timeline of the events in question, noticing that many articles now had outdated information. This is my attempt to compile a comprehensive timeline of what occurred. I have done my best to trim the fat, so to speak, and create a streamlined, easy to comprehend timeline of 5 years, 1 criminal, and multiple defamation trials. This is the complete timeline of the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial. In 2019, a young woman with political aspirations, even so far as to one day wanting to become a member of parliament, worked at the front desk for the Minister of Defense and Industry. That woman's name was Brittany Higgins. Whilst working at the desk, she garnered the attention of a man named Bruce Lehrmann, at the time a political staffer. On the 2nd to the 3rd of March 2019, a new Minister for Defense and Industry was sworn in, a woman by the name of Linda Reynolds. A swearing-in ceremony was held and some members of her team decided to have drinks at the Kingston Hotel. That night, Lehrmann discussed his attraction to Miss Higgins, commenting he was also aware she was looking for a job. A colleague by the name of Miss Hamer happened to know Higgins, and Lehrmann saw this as an opportunity to connect, asking Miss Hamer to invite Miss Higgins to the Kingston. Higgins accepted the invitation, however, already had prior commitments, planning instead to drop in but leave soon after. This was known, or at least suspected to be an informal job interview, with Higgins and Miss Hamer ultimately hitting it off. Whilst Miss Hamer was only responsible for the Perth-based staffers, she liked Higgins and was happy to let the new Minister Reynolds know the group had met and supported Higgins joining the department. As Higgins attempted to leave for her prior commitments, Lehrmann grabbed her phone, with him and a colleague asking her to stay for another drink. After some back and forth, albeit possibly playfully, the phone was returned and Higgins was on her way. Miss Hamer was not at all pleased with this interaction, however, expressing frustration that the pair could have made Higgins feel the pressure that her new possible job was contingent on her staying and drinking. The ensuing argument reached such a degree that later, Miss Hamer resigned, citing overall displeasure with her current job, although not initially informing the newly appointed Minister Reynolds as to what happened at that pub. During an exit interview, however, Miss Hamer's displeasure was made very known, with Lehrmann and his colleague being reprimanded and Higgins' potential job up in the air, although ultimately, Higgins was brought onto the team. On the 15th of March, Reynolds held a dinner for her new staff, with both Lehrmann and Higgins in attendance. The pair left at approximately the same time, with Higgins alleging Lehrmann attempted to kiss her and Higgins rejecting the advancement. This is disputed, however, with Justice Lee, the presiding judge for the Lehrmann defamation trial against 10, not receiving enough evidence to confidently assert its truth. What is confidently asserted, however, is that during this period, Lehrmann was quite attracted to Miss Higgins. On the 2nd of March 2019, a night out was organised with staffers from Reynolds' office and assistants from the Royal Australian Navy planning to get drinks at the dock. Higgins was invited by a colleague of hers, Lauren Gain, with Higgins inviting a man she'd been speaking to on Bumble, as well as other colleagues, one of which was Bruce Lehrmann. That evening, Higgins drank a glass of wine at home before arriving at the bar around 7:19, with Lehrmann and a colleague named Mr. Wenk arriving at roughly 8:19. A small group formed consisting of Lehrmann, Wenk, Gain, and Higgins, with Higgins' date eventually leaving the event early. Higgins herself acknowledges she ignored her date, with Higgins initially claiming Nick was bullied out. However, CCTV footage and witness testimony disputes this recollection. Whilst initially Lehrmann claimed to have only purchased drinks for himself and Mr. Wenk, CCTV footage shows Lehrmann buying Higgins at least 2 drinks as well as passing her one and encouraging her to scull another. It is estimated Higgins had 11 drinks before leaving the dock, with a forensic lip reader stating Lehrmann was, quote, lining up drinks, plying the woman with alcohol. In his report, the lip reader believes the following conversation occurred as Higgins and the group attempted to leave the dock. The night continued as Lehrmann, Gain, Wenk, and Higgins transitioned to Club 88 miles per hour, a retro-themed club referencing Back to the Future. Whilst the number of drinks consumed inside the club isn't known, it is believed 2 or more shots were drunk, increasing the total to 13 drinks. Both Higgins and Lehrmann deny engaging in any intimacy with one another whilst inside the club. However, text messages and witness testimony challenges both of their recountings, with Miss Gain sending the following text to a colleague the next day. Gain further reported seeing the pair being physical with one another and kissing passionately. Higgins' intoxication was also referenced, with reports Higgins fell whilst in the club and stumbling a number of times. At 1:30 a.m, the group left 88 miles per hour, with the group pairing off as each supposedly lived in the same direction as another. Wenk and Gain headed in one direction, with Lehrmann and Higgins in another. The plan for the pair to part ways after their shared ride home was altered, with Lehrmann changing their destination, not for home, but for Parliament House. Numerous reasons, some more contentious than others, were given for this decision. Lehrmann alleged he had to return to Parliament as he left his keys and needed them to return home. Lehrmann, however, lived with his girlfriend at the time, and while she would not have likely been happy being awoken by a cheating boyfriend, albeit unaware of said infidelity, he would have been able to return home and get his keys Monday morning. Lehrmann also alleged he had work that needed tending to, asserting he needed to prepare documents for question time. However, not only is there no record of Lehrmann logging into a computer that evening at all, none of these answer why Higgins would have also decided to return to Parliament House. The more likely motivation was found to be an attempt to keep the evening going. Higgins reported, "Bruce and I were in an Uber to go home and he wanted to come back to Parliament House. He had some whiskey to show me or something." During a later meeting over Lehrmann and Higgins' nighttime return to Parliament House, Lehrmann also told Fiona Brown, Linda Reynolds' chief of staff, that he and Higgins returned to drink whiskey. It is important to recognise, however, whether or not the pair mutually agreed to return to Parliament or not, there was potential pressure present. Higgins was alone, drunk, with a more senior member of her department, and it is reasonable to believe Higgins may have felt certain pressures to attend Parliament that evening out of fear for her career. This echoes the prior concerns of Miss Hamer back at the Kingston. Higgins and Lehrmann gain entry to Parliament House around 1:40 a.m. on the 23rd, with Lehrmann lying to the guard, stating, "We've been requested to pick up some documents." Lehrmann argues he told this lie as the guards would not have allowed him to enter for a simple set of left-behind keys. However, this opens up some significant questions. Knowing now that this evening ends in Lehrmann leaving Parliament alone, why was Higgins never consulted as to whether or not she had a security pass, or whether or not she had a better reason to enter Parliament, or why she needed to be in Parliament House, full stop? Higgins and Lehrmann enter through point A. Security guard Mark Fairweather was told by Lehrmann we're here to do some work and needed entry to the Reynolds suite, with Fairweather collecting and checking their relevant information. Fairweather also made Lehrmann and Higgins sign the visitor pass register, with Lehrmann completing the sign-in on Higgins' behalf, a fact he would later deny despite CCTV footage. Whilst Fairweather noted some hints of alcohol and intoxication, he was, quote, "not a breathalyzer in human form," and misjudged Higgins' level of intoxication. Higgins' level of intoxication was likely only brought into question when she was unable to put her shoes back on after passing through the metal detector, with Fairweather needing to let her put them back on when she arrived at Reynolds' office. Here is when CCTV footage is lost. There are no cameras capturing Reynolds' office. Higgins and Lehrmann are escorted to the minister's office and left by security. Lehrmann claims he and Higgins split up at this point, with Lehrmann not seeing her for the remainder of the evening. However, as discussed earlier, his supposed actions that evening, other than intending to continue drinking with Higgins, are not supported. I tread exceptionally carefully here, and some people may wish to quickly skip ahead if they do not want to hear specifics. But importantly, it is disputed whether or not Higgins was entirely conscious or not. It is disputed whether or not Higgins cried no numerous times. It is disputed whether or not Lehrmann's leg was pressed so hard into Higgins' body she was bruised. It is disputed how much of her dress was taken off. What is not disputed, however, is that on the balance of probabilities, Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins in that office. Lehrmann is seen leaving Parliament alone at 2:33 am, returning his pass in a hurry and hastily informing security he does not intend to return. Guard Anderson is sent to perform a welfare check on Higgins, where she is found naked or partially naked, depending on whose statement you're reading. An ambulance and medical assistance were considered for Higgins, however, deemed not necessary, with CCTV showing Higgins leaving Parliament at around 10 am, wearing a jacket found in the ministerial suite. The couch in Reynolds' office is immediately cleaned. Whilst initially floated as part of a broader cover-up, it turned out to be a typical policy, however, unfortunately, removing evidence. Before I go any further, I need to make something explicitly clear. I will not be discussing the defamation case between Linda Reynolds and Brittany Higgins, mainly because at the time of this recording, their trial is still ongoing. As you will hear, a significant claim put forward by Higgins, Wilkinson, and Ten revolved around this notion of a concerted government cover-up and a lack of support for Miss Higgins. Of course, this is intrinsically intertwined with Reynolds and her department and the current defamation case. I will be talking about the cover-up allegations more broadly, however, specific aspects that relate to the lack of support allegedly caused by Reynolds has been omitted, but I intend to make a follow-up video once her trial is completed. On the 26th of March, Chief of Staff Fiona Brown was informed of Higgins and Lehrmann's unauthorized entry into Parliament. She was also informed Higgins was found naked and unconscious. Individual meetings were organized, with Lehrmann giving his aforementioned drink whiskey rationale, stating he and Higgins chatted, however when probed, further expressing he didn't wish to get into that. In short, Higgins and Brown met and communicated numerous times between the 26th of March and the 1st of April regarding the morning of the 23rd. I won't be discussing these notes in depth as they mainly relate to Reynolds and her department's actions during this time. However, Brown's notes would indicate continued support was offered to Higgins, with reassurance given that she would be supported, as well as autonomy respected in regards to whether or not she wanted to pursue anything. Brown denies Higgins ever directly telling her what occurred that evening. However, at some point during those meetings, Higgins likely said Lehrmann was on top of her. Whilst nothing explicit was supposedly stated to either Brown or Reynolds, a text exchange between Higgins and Mr. Dillaway shows that on the 26th of March, when asked, quote, "Was it just you and Bruce who went back there, or a group of people? Did you hook up in there, or did someone take advantage of you?" Higgins wrote, quote, "Yeah, it was just Bruce and I from what I recall. I was barely lucid. I really don't feel like it was consensual at all." Further, on the 27th of March, Higgins had a conversation with Christopher Payne. Payne asked whether she was and Higgins responded with, "I was drunk. I could not have consented." On the 1st of April, Higgins met with Brown and Reynolds in the same room the occurred. This meeting will not be discussed in depth for the aforementioned reasons. However, after said meeting, Higgins met with the Australian Federal Police. Someone had previously informed the AFP what had occurred, with 2 federal agents already aware of a sensitive matter pertaining to a female who was attached to Minister Reynolds' office. Higgins gave her accounting of the event, informing the agents, however, she did not want to report this officially, just off the record. Higgins further told agents she had gone to Phillip Medical Center to have tests done, as she was not sure protection was used and was awaiting results. For one reason or another, however, this did not end up being factual. Higgins was informed the case would be handed to the Sexual Assault and Child Abuse Team. On the 4th of April, Lehrmann was given a show cause letter, giving him a chance to give a rationale for his actions in entering Parliament on the morning of the 23rd. Following receipt of response, the minister reached the conclusion that Mr. Lehrmann had engaged in serious misconduct, had breached the ministerial staff standards, and proceeded to terminate him. On the 5th of April, Lehrmann is terminated. The official termination was based on prior security breaches and lying to get into Parliament after hours. On the 8th of April, Higgins met with SACAT officers. Harmon was aware that Higgins did not want to proceed with an official investigation, however, was seeking additional options available. Higgins further met Officer Anderson, as well as Canberra Crisis Centre Counsellor Catherine Cripps. Higgins and Cripps would cease the engagement, however, with Higgins asserting she acted in a, quote, very weird way. Justice Lee, however, brings this account into question. During this meeting, Higgins was also requested to not delete any photos or texts from the evening of the 22nd of March. Herman later tried to contact Higgins to discuss available medical services, but Higgins was uncontactable. Further, texting Mr. Dillaway on the 9th of April that the AFP said pursuing it through the legal system usually takes around around 2 years start to finish and is pretty involved, and that she honestly would rather just move on seems way too taxing. An email was sent on the 13th of April informing Detective Harmon that after careful consideration, I have decided not to proceed any further, while remarking that she really did appreciate their time, professionalism, and assistance with this complaint, and that Detective Harmon helped more than they could have known. After the federal election in 2019, Higgins transferred to the office of Michaela Cash, then Minister for Small and Family Business, Skills, and Vocational Education, and later Minister for Employment, Skills, Small, and Family Business. Cash was not initially aware of what had occurred whilst Higgins worked in Reynolds' office, only becoming aware of the event due to a media inquiry that came through in October 2019. Journalists had somehow found out about the allegation, with Higgins disclosing the event to Chief of Staff Daniel Try and Liberal staffer Christy Pearson, with Higgins giving Try consent to tell Cash, as so the situation could be handled and had not become public. On the weekend of the 19th to the 20th, Agent Cleaves managed to reach Higgins, informing her that the sexual assault allegation may be raised at Senate estimates. Higgins called Try, who said he would handle it. However, this changed Higgins' perceptions of the AFP. Quote, "It made me scared about the relationship between the AFP and Parliament House. I guess it did change my opinion about what I perceived to be, the relationship between Parliament House and the police. It made me scared. It did. It intimidated me." This was the beginning of an apparent fear and distrust Higgins had towards the AFP and government. Quote, "Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it is awfully hard to get it back in." While one can empathize with this trauma, as Lee states, the apparent fear that the AFP would not do its job if a complaint was pursued, even belatedly, is without rational foundation. 2020 was largely stagnant, with Higgins, however, experiencing a complicated internal dilemma: pursue charges for and potentially harm or even destroy her career, or keep trying to move forward. Catherine Cripps testified to this tug of war between "I want to report, but I want my job." Higgins had a fear of losing her, quote, "dream job." This tug of war seemed to shift dramatically, though, when on November 9th, Four Corners released Inside the Canberra Bubble. This was a report alleging incidents of inappropriate conduct and statements towards and about women, bullying, sex, alcohol, and all-around inappropriate behaviors. Higgins' assault is not mentioned, but it starts a broader conversation about the safety of women in Parliament. This is a turning point in Higgins' decision to now move forward and press charges. On the 18th of January 2021, Brittany Higgins' boyfriend, David Shiraz, sent an email to Lisa Wilkinson, an esteemed journalist for the project. The email header was quoted, "Me Too, Liberal Party, project pitch. I've got a sensitive story surrounding a sexual assault in Parliament House, with Shiraz continuing to provide more information about the incident." On the 19th of January, a timeline document was also shared with Wilkinson. Now, Higgins was emphatic that the document was solely created by her with the goal of uncovering what was buried personally so far down, but it was likely created in conjunction with Shiraz with the intention to be supplied to the media after that Four Corners documentary invoked something in Higgins. That document was shared with the rest of the 10 team on the 20th, and due to the sensitive nature of the story, it was codenamed Enviro. This was the beginning of an explosive story alleging government cover-up and internal pressures to pause an active investigation due to the upcoming federal election, as well as a lack of support for a young woman who was assaulted in Parliament House. Wilkinson intended to hold Britt's hand through this, with Wilkinson and the producer for the show, Angus Llewellyn, having direct contact with Higgins from the time of the 21st and 26th of January, respectively. On the 27th of January, Higgins, Shiraz, Wilkinson, and Mr. Llewellyn had an initial meeting with the apparent goal of determining the reliability and credibility of Higgins' story. This culminated in a 5-hour recorded interview, which luckily we have the transcripts of. Wilkinson and Llewellyn regarded Higgins as traumatized, raw, and emotional, feeling she was let down by those she worked with. This was in no way a neutral interview, with neither of the pair engaging as disinterested professionals holding reasonable skepticism or attempting to examine any ulterior motives present. As Justice Lee puts it, it appears Mr. Llewellyn was uninterested in reflecting upon Mr. Shiraz's motives. In the light of what had been communicated by Mr. Shiraz before and during this first interview, any journalist who did not think Mr. Shiraz had the motivation to inflict immediate political damage would have to be willfully blind. A journalist acting reasonably would recognize this motivation and scrutinize what was being conveyed, cognizant of it. It was also alleged there were attempts within the government to hinder access to CCTV AFP from the night of the assault. However, these claims were later found to be, quote, devoid of merit. Whilst Higgins may have wanted to see the footage and been subsequently blocked from seeing said footage, Higgins' evidence-in-chief interview had not yet occurred, and showing an individual footage of the event before getting their genuine recollection can lead to altered memories or perceptions of an event. On top of that, while some of the AFP might have been frustrated with the timeline in which they received the CCTV footage, that's wholly unsurprising and normal when you consider numerous checks and balances for collecting and transferring CCTV footage needed to occur. This is further ignoring the fact that Agent Cleaves was able to get the footage relatively quickly, however, acknowledging it did take longer and required them to make a few phone calls, but she was able to view it, collect it, and hold the footage. Further bolstering this narrative was Miss Wilkinson's apparent belief that the system of policing within Parliament House was archaic, leading to the conclusion that the AFP police operated at the directive of the parliamentarians themselves and no one was independently policing potential criminal behaviour within Parliament House. That members of the executive were interfering with how the AFP went about their job at investigating crime, and from this dangerous notion, it was a short step to embracing the idea that any delay in securing CCTV footage must be suspicious, rather than being the regular product of the needing to obtain the permissions of the presiding officers. Higgins also presented the photo to Wilkinson and Mr. Llewellyn of a bruise on her leg, alleging that it was from Lehrmann's leg pressed into her during the assault. It was supposedly taken days after the event, with Higgins further expressing there was a second photo as well. The second photo never materialized, however. At the time, this offered further evidence than simply just he said, she said. Wilkinson and Llewellyn, however, did not assess the photo in depth, and seemingly forgot about that supposed second photo. The metadata for the bruise photo was never assessed for independent verification, with the pair going as far as to seemingly ignore concerns they had in regards to the photo. Of importance to note is that Higgins alleged either through transferring phones, damage to her phone, or even a remote wipe of her phone, a significant amount of texts, photos, videos, and overall evidence was missing. Wilkinson reasonably questioned why the bruise photo still existed. Llewellyn, however, did not appear to be concerned. With no proof of my own, though, I suspect a stuff-up more than anything else. My gut feeling is there's no covert monitoring or wiping of phones going on at all, it's just a stuff-up. And my gut feeling is to avoid the topic as it raises unanswerable questions and weakens rather than strengthens her very strong claims by adding in unnecessary doubt where there currently isn't any. In a later conversation with Llewellyn, Higgins changed the bruise photo to be supposedly taken a couple of hours, not days after the assault, with Llewellyn not investigating further. Channel 10 argues that by making Higgins sign a statutory declaration on the 10th of February, Llewellyn did his due diligence. However, Lee argues from the very start there was a failure to effectively inquire into why Higgins still held some evidence but not others, with said statutory declaration not addressing the selective retention of data or why this photo survived the alleged wipe. On the 29th of January, Wilkinson, Llewellyn, and executives from 10 met to discuss the story, ultimately deciding to move forward, with the primary reason being not the sexual assault, but because the involvement of the federal government and politicians gave this story a deep public interest, and the project team had a preoccupation with the involvement of the federal government and politicians in this story, and the broader issue of safety inside Parliament House. There was an internal police force in Parliament House, which the woman felt had not been able to properly investigate her claims, including by not being able to access key documents and CCTV footage from the night in question, and believed the story that the project team wanted to tell was about the treatment Miss Higgins said she had endured after complaining that she had been, rather than a story about the alleged itself. The villain of this case was the government because of its lack of care of Miss Higgins. Now, it is important to note Llewellyn did seek confirmation for a number of things in this investigation, including whether or not there was a report made back in 2019, finding Lehrmann online, confirming identities, confirming Higgins had seen Miss Cripps the psychologist, speaking to Higgins' flatmate, and asking Higgins and Shiraz for numerous documents. An official interview between Wilkinson and Higgins was conducted on the 2nd of February, with Justice Lee stating in quite a humorous way, even a failure to confirm an aspect of her story did not shake the conviction of Mr. Llewellyn. He noted that even though he was unable to confirm anything about the AFP investigation, this lack of information did not mean that something was untrue or that the reliability of Miss Higgins' story was otherwise in doubt. Further to that, a core aspect of this interview was the notion that Higgins was forced to choose between her career or going to the police, and that Higgins was scared of losing her job. Interestingly though, the Liberal government was expected to lose the next election. It was a miracle they won. If they had lost, Higgins would have lost her job anyway, and it seems to be that no one within the project team considered the reality that, as Justice Lee says, the fact Miss Higgins would lose her job anyway, along with all the other staffers, that the whole premise of fear of losing her job merited investigation. Higgins signed an adult appearance release on the 3rd of February, with Mr. Llewellyn starting a paper edit on the 4th. By the 5th of February 2021, Higgins resigns from the Office of Cash, with Higgins secretly recording said meeting with Cash and Chief of Staff Daniel Try. Cash and Try were supportive, offering to move her to Queensland so she could be far away from Canberra, and offering her to be part of the social media team. However, Higgins stated, quote, "It's very kind, I don't think I can be connected to politics." Cash and Try further asked if Higgins intended to go to the police, adding that, quote, "Daniel and I are here to support you." The decision was made to set the broadcast for the 15th of February. However, when it came to seeking comments from those involved, it was interesting, to say the least. Conversations about defamation regarding naming Lehrmann were held, but Lehrmann was not given a real chance to respond to the allegations. Questions were really asked just to protect from defamation, rather than actually engage with others aside from Higgins. Requests did not go out till Friday afternoon, the 12th of February, with 10 a.m. Monday as the deadline. Network 10 sent detailed questions to Mr. Lehrmann's Hotmail account at 2:46 on the 12th of February, and a follow-up email on the morning of the 15th, but no response was received. This was unsurprising for two core reasons. There is no evidence Lehrmann saw any of these emails or even knew of the story till a friend of his messaged him about it on the 15th of February. There is also no evidence that suggested the Hotmail address used was regularly checked. This way of reaching out to Lehrmann was regarded as smoke signals by investigative journalists. However, once aware of the allegations, Lehrmann had obtained 3 separate pieces of advice not to respond to the media inquiries, and likely would not have done so anyway. With that said, Lee agrees that it was, quote, "a super reasonable amount of time if one was not interested in obtaining information from others and testing the veracity of the information with Miss Higgins." On the 15th of February, an article by Samantha Maiden was released, reporting Higgins' accounts of that evening, but not naming Lehrmann. This is the first time I've mentioned Samantha Maiden, mainly because the information Maiden released overlapped dramatically with the Wilkinson interview, as well as the fact it was much less impactful on the zeitgeist, and this case got settled pretty quickly, as we'll discuss later. That evening, the project released the interview between Wilkinson and Higgins, documenting a, quote, "culture of silence, especially around an election campaign. It's just like letting the team down, you're not a team player." This notion of an unsupported victim and cover-up by the Morrison government was political TNT. On the 16th of February, Scott Morrison and Linda Reynolds apologized that Higgins felt unsupported, and that the debrief occurred in the same room where she was. The Foster review of how serious incidents are handled at Parliament was also ordered, as well as the Gutchins review of who knew what and when about the alleged, and the Jenkins work on Parliament's workplace culture. Later, there was also the Kunkel inquiry into the behaviours of the Prime Minister's media staff, and the Hammond review of how coalition officers operate. Higgins again initiates contact with the Australian Federal Police, having an evidence-in-chief interview on the 24th of February. Much of the information given in that interview we have already covered in one way or another, or it relates to Reynolds' defamation case, which I will not be touching. Now, on the 19th of April, Lehrmann is interviewed by the Australian Federal Police for the first time. Lehrmann claims alcohol is not kept in Reynolds' office, a statement at odds with what he told Brown years ago by this point, as well as the fact that new evidence and videos show whiskey was in the office. Lehrmann further claimed he didn't know why Higgins was returning to Parliament that night, stating it might have had something to do with her media advisor role, and further doubling down on that he went back to Parliament to get his keys, whilst also admitting Higgins was intoxicated that night. On the 26th of May, Higgins has a second evidence-in-chief interview and belatedly gives her phone to the AFP. Approximately 8,000 photos were downloaded, but none from the night of the 22nd, despite the AFP detective telling Higgins to not delete photos from the night back in 2019. CCTV footage and witness testimony did confirm, however, photos were taken from the night in question. Statements indicate that Higgins was cleaning the phone before giving it to police, reportedly concerned over the secret recording of Cash and Try, as well as a photo of her in a MAGA hat she was concerned would be leaked. It appeared that the missing texts or photos were also somehow removed from iCloud data or backups selectively. We've already discussed these wiped remotely allegations, with Lee stating that although some unspecified material might have been lost through a faulty transfer between devices, the weight of the evidence requires the conclusion that it's more likely than not that she curated data because she thought deleting some material assisted in her maintaining the cogency of her 2021 account. On the 16th of September, Lehrmann, whose identity is now known to the public, pleaded not guilty to a charge of sexual intercourse without consent. In December of that year, Higgins, alongside Grace Tame, is named Woman of the Year. On the 9th of February 2022, Higgins and Tame gave scathing speeches at the ABC Stream National Press Club regarding Scott Morrison and his government's management of sexual assault. That year, the Wilkinson-Higgins interview is nominated for a Logie, and on the 21st of June 2022, Lisa Wilkinson wins and delivers her now infamous Logie speech. Now at this time, the courts are attempting to assign juries to the criminal case against Lehrmann. This speech is seen as a contempt of court and endorsing Higgins' credibility, obliterating the distinction between an allegation and a finding of guilt. The trial is delayed and a significant amount of blame was thrown onto Wilkinson. The fact is, however, that speech was checked and approved by not only Channel 10 lawyers, but also CEO Bev McGarvey. Channel 10's lawyer, Miss Smithies, read the speech once and heard it spoken once, giving legal advice and making one section more general, with McGarvey texting Wilkinson afterwards, saying it was a beautiful speech. Wilkinson was thrown under the bus, and this was never publicly corrected till the 2023-2024 trial. Lehrmann also regarded this as saving him in some ways. The adjournment occasioned by the Logie speech fortuitously allowed his legal team sufficient opportunity to dig deeper, go down the rabbit holes, find the golden nuggets, with the potential result that if they had not done what they did, it would have been catastrophic. On the 4th of October, a criminal trial against Lehrmann was initiated, with Lehrmann pleading not guilty. Over the next 3 weeks, 29 witnesses are called, and that is all I'm going to say on the matter, for one very important reason. The jury was disbanded, and the charges were dropped. Jury deliberations started on the 19th of October, and by the 25th of October, the jury still did not have a verdict. On the 27th of October, during a routine tidying of the jury room, an officer accidentally knocked a juror's document holder off the table, revealing additional information that was not presented as evidence. The information in question discussed the lack of utility in trying to quantify how often false allegations occur. As such, the jury was discharged. On the 2nd of December, the charges against Lehrmann were also dropped due to Higgins' deteriorating mental health. On the 13th of December, Higgins and the Commonwealth settled a confidential personal injury claim with speculation it could be up to $3 million. We now know the settlement was $2.445 million. $400,000 for hurt, distress, and humiliations, $1.48 million as a capital payment for loss of earning capacity, $220,000 as reimbursement for medical and like expenses, $100,000 for past and future domestic assistance, as well as $245,000 for legal cost reimbursement. On the 21st of December, it was reported Lehrmann sent defamation demands or concerns notices to numerous media outlets over reporting on the allegations. These included News Corp Australia, Paramount, and the radio station WSFM. That same day, it was reported the ACT Chief Minister and Attorney General announced an inquiry into the handling of the Lehrmann criminal investigation after numerous allegations and one particular allegation that the police aligned with the defence. The investigation would be conducted by retired Queensland Judge Walter Sofronoff KC. On the 7th of February 2023, a statement of claim was lodged against News Life Media and Samantha Maiden. Lehrmann complaints were alleged to carry numerous defamatory imputations, and that same day a statement of claim was lodged against Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson for their interview with Higgins with similar imputations. On the 5th of April, Lehrmann expanded his lawsuit to also be against ABC over their broadcast of the press club as, quote, it carried an assertion as a matter of fact that he had Miss Higgins on the couch in Parliament House. Now, the statute of limitations for defamation had passed by this point. You get 1 year from the moment of publication, but on the 20th of April, it was reported Justice Lee approved a defamation extension for Lehrmann. I am in no way a lawyer. I have no legal background, and what I'm about to say is literally someone reading a legal submission and doing their best to Google their way through it. But my understanding is the reason it was extended is because Lehrmann was given advice that defamation proceedings should not be contemplated until after criminal proceedings have been resolved, and that is exactly the advice one would expect a reasonable criminal solicitor to give. On the 30th of May, it was reported that Lehrmann, News Corp, and Samantha Maiden settled their defamation case with no damages paid. However, a contribution was made to the legal costs, and the news.com.au articles were amended. We did not know at the time what this amounted to, but we now know this was a $295,000 contribution towards legal costs without admission of liability. On the 4th of June, Lehrmann held an exclusive and first public interview with Channel 7. In this interview, Lehrmann mentions the prospect of suing Higgins personally for defamation, as well as taking aim at ACT prosecutor Shane Drumgold. At the time, a 7 spokesperson said Lehrmann was not paid for the interview. However, it was alleged that 7 paid Lehrmann rent to the tune of $104,000, as well as paid for drugs and sex workers to butter him up for an interview. Now, the man alleging this, however, former 7 network producer Taylor Orbach, was not exactly regarded as the most credible witness, with 7 denying the claim. And further, Mr. Orbach conceded that he never saw a record of any payment being received. He further alleged 7 lawyers encouraged the deletion of evidence, with 7 responding that at no point did they ask anyone to delete or destroy any evidence, and arguing that Mr. Orbach was trying to get back at 7 over his contract being terminated, with Orbach admitting he did hate his former colleague, blaming him for a failed contract renewal. Mr. Orbach further alleged that during this time, Mr. Lehrmann provided 7 with material from his criminal case, including an AFP statement of facts and more than 2,000 text messages between Higgins and her former partner, something Lehrmann had prior denied doing. These claims were ultimately not overall material to the case and remain up in the air as far as I'm aware. On the 31st of July, the Sofronoff-Casey report was finalized. It was agreed that the ACT would have the report for a month before releasing it to the public. However, on the 2nd of August, the Australian published its findings. Sofronoff had given the Australian and ABC copies of the report under the condition they do not publish the contents until after it was released by the ACT government. Due to this leak, the ACT government said they would release the full report early the following week. As for the report, it was an 839-page document, and to be incredibly brief, it found the Department of Public Prosecutions and police were found to have acted appropriately in bringing charges, having enough evidence to charge Lehrmann. However, Drumgold failed in some of his duties. In one instance regarding the disclosure of relevant documents for the defense. On the 19th of October, Wilkinson sues Network 10 over her legal bills for the Lehrmann defamation suit. Wilkinson was using her own lawyer due to a deteriorating relationship with 10, one core example being the Logie speech, with Wilkinson alleging 10 had previously agreed to pay her legal costs, irrelevant of whether she used their lawyer or her own. Documents seen by The Guardian show Network 10 accepted it was liable to indemnify the plaintiff on 2 separate occasions in both March and June 2023. Documents showed Wilkinson first invoiced 10 initially for $375,000 in May, reducing that to $353,538, and later in September, sending an invoice for $370,017, both of which were unpaid. One day before the trial, on the 21st of November, ABC and Lehrmann reach a, quote, mutually acceptable confidential term without admission of liability. We now know that ABC paid a total of $150,000, $143,000 of which was to legal costs with no admission of liability, as well as publishing a statement on its corrections and clarifications page not to reinstate the YouTube video which was removed on April 6th and to remove a Facebook video. On the 22nd of November, the trial begins. Opening statements are given, and it is live streamed on YouTube, with Lehrmann actually expressing a preference for such and Channel 10 objecting. Justice Lee decided the case would be live streamed by reference to the general principle that the openness of the judicial branch of government in this country is a basic democratic right which the court should actively support. Now, we don't really need to go over this trial in much depth, as I've given you the core components of what transpired, just in chronological order, rather than when we received them during the court process. I am not a lawyer. I have no legal background. I would encourage you to go watch Justice Lee's ruling because I am just a guy who had to Google his way through legal definitions. In short, Wilkinson and Ten relied on a truth defense, ultimately winning, but not entirely vindicated. In regards to Ten, Lee chastised the lack of investigation regarding the bruise photo, the unreliability of their main source partially regarding lost items on her phone, and not wanting to pursue unnecessary doubts. Lee criticized Wilkinson and Llewellyn's willingness to assist in the political use of the allegations, as well as not further investigating the timeline document. Wilkinson and Llewellyn were also criticized over their ahistorical and misconceived perception of the AFP. Lee also took aim at Ten for not effectively getting in contact with Lehrmann, noting he wasn't living as a hermit and worked at a public company. Lee noted that Wilkinson had the chops to spot the confusion about data and that it was a potential problem going to the general credit of Miss Higgins, but she allowed her well-tuned and correct journalistic instincts to be fobbed off by self-evidently inadequate response. Lee also took aim at Wilkinson relying too much on her own background knowledge and experience in Parliament workplace culture and did not withstand the objective analysis. Lee did not accept that Ten or Wilkinson had established their conduct in publishing the matter in its character conveying the defamatory imputations as to Mr. Lehrmann was reasonable in the circumstance. However, Justice Lee did find on the balance of probabilities that Bruce Lehrmann did rape Brittany Higgins, and as such, he was not entitled for his reputation to be protected.
Having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lehrmann made the mistake of coming back for his hat. As I stressed at the commencement of these reasons, there is a substantive difference between the criminal and civil standards of proof. To make the grave finding Mr. Lehrmann Miss Higgins, it's unnecessary for me to reach the level of certainty indispensable for criminal liability. The respondents have not won because I can exclude all other possibilities as to what happened, but because they have proven that such possibilities that are open on the evidence, both individually and collectively, are unlikely, and further because I am satisfied that the evidence provides an appropriate basis upon which to reach a conclusion. Put another way, they have proven that the whole of the evidence properly analysed establishes a reasonable satisfaction on the preponderance of probabilities of facts sufficient to make out the substantial truth defence. As a result of the inconclusive criminal trial, Mr. Lehrmann remains a man who has not been convicted of any offence, but he has now been found by the civil standard of proof to have engaged in a great wrong. It follows Miss Higgins has been proven to be a victim of sexual assault. At first glance, this might be thought to be an odd outcome, but if one leaves aside superficial reactions and appreciates the high value the common law has always placed upon the importance of securing against the conviction of the innocent, it is not at all peculiar. Ensuring an accused is deprived of their liberty only if a prosecution can exclude all reasonable hypothesis consistent with innocence has been as elemental to our criminal justice system as the presumption of innocence and the related golden thread running through the criminal law that the prosecution bears the burden of proof. Mr. Lehrmann is not entitled to the vindication of his reputation. The respondents, however, are entitled to vindication by the entry of judgment on the statement of blame. But even though the respondents have legally justified their imputation of rape, this does not mean that their conduct was justified in any broader or colloquial sense. The contemporaneous documents and the broadcast itself demonstrate the allegation of rape was a minor theme and the allegation of cover-up was the major motif. The publication of accusations of corrupt conduct in putting up roadblocks and forcing a victim to choose between her career and justice may have won the project team like Miss Maid in a glittering prize, but when the accusation is examined properly, it was supposition without reasonable foundation in verifiable fact. Its dissemination caused a broom of confusion and it did much collateral damage, including to the fair and orderly progress of the underlying allegation of sexual assault through the criminal justice system.
Lehrmann was ordered to pay a discounted $2 million to Network 10, with actual costs a whopping $3.6 million. As of today, the legal fee disagreement between Wilkinson and 10 is still ongoing, with Lehrmann lodging a notice of appeal through the federal court on the 21st of May, 2024. Currently, Reynolds and Higgins are still in a defamation suit, and I intend to make a similar video on the matter once it's concluded. I hope you've enjoyed, and more importantly, I hope I haven't missed anything important. If I have, please let me know. Come join the Discord, come talk about it, come say hi, come let me know what you think in the comments. I wish you all the best.